attention. Welcome and thank you for attending this evening's event. My name is Carrie Enger. I'm the Historic Program Manager for the Sheridan Community Land Trust. And how many of you are familiar with the Land Trust? Good, good. As you know, we conserve land, recreation with our trails, and also have a history mission, which tonight we will be exploring our discovery session for a history mission. And to give you a little bit of background about our history mission, we hold 2 historic preservation easements. One is on the Houston Homestead in Claremont, and the other one is on the Sheridan Inn, which we are in tonight. And a historic preservation easement is between a property owner and an organization like the Land Trust to help keep the historical integrity of either a building or a site. And to give you an idea, some of the architectural structures that our easement helps preserve on the Sheridan Inn is the wooden beams above us and also the stone fireplace. I've been here for 2 years. I'm also helping to develop the community outreach program of the History Mission. So we give walking tours, presentations like tonight, and also next week we will start to partner with the Hub on Smith with the Explore History program. And the first one is History of Dude Ranching, which our AmeriCorps Vista Alexis Petrie helped develop some of the research for, and that is Tuesday, September 14th at 10:30 at the Hub on Smith. So for tonight's presentation, it is generously funded by the Wyoming Humanities Council, and also the program will be video recorded, and we will have it up on our YouTube channel for if you want to share it with family and friends who are not able to come here tonight. Yes, we're excited about that too. Bathrooms, a little bit of housekeeping. Go through the double doors and they're on the left. And there's also coffee and dessert in the back. We don't really want to take it home, so eat as much as you want. And I want to introduce our speaker tonight for Beckoning Frontiers, the entrepreneur and the promoter, Jeremy Johnston, which we are very excited to have with us this evening. He is the historian of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, the Tate Endowed Chair of Western History, and the managing editor of the papers of William F. Cody. And just to name a few of his accomplishments, which I would probably take up a lot of the time with them, he has received in 2006 the Coke Wood Award, and also he was the past president of the Wyoming State Historical Society and currently serves on the Public History Committee of the Western History Association. And he is a co-editor of the memoir of Buffalo Bill's fellow town founder of Cody, Wyoming, George W.T. Beck, and the title is Beckoning Frontiers, the Memoir of Wyoming Entrepreneur, and it was released in the spring of 2020. We have a limited number of editions at the table for a $30 donation, and all proceeds go to the Land Trust. So please everybody give a warm welcome to Jeremy Johnston. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back in Sheridan. So I always love visiting your community, and I always appreciate the warm welcome everyone gives one when you arrive here. I was actually born in Powell. And so I spend a lot of time crossing over the Bighorns coming out here, and spent a little bit of time at Camp Story. My mom thought church camp would do me good. She thought church camp would do me good. So I think some of it stuck, but not a lot. But anyway, so it's great to be here in Sheridan again. And I'm pleased today to talk to you about one of your former residents that Cody, Wyoming stole from you. George Washington Thornton Beck. We're almost there. So, and I do have a disclaimer while we're getting the technology going here. So, I was once asked if these presentations that I deliver, if this was an avocation or vocational, and I'm happy to say it's actually both. I was very fortunate to grow up around all of my grandparents who shared with me their stories of the past of the Bighorn Basin. I had two great grandmothers who were living when I was younger, including one who actually walked to Cody, Wyoming with her family in the late 1890s from Sheridan, Nebraska to settle there. And so I've always been interested in history and my own heritage, and I was very fortunate to make a career out of that. In fact, I remember going to the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, at that time the Buffalo Bill Historical Center, with my grandfather, and I asked him, "Granddad, what can someone do to work here?" And he gave me the standard work hard speech, and you can do this. And it took a while, but eventually I did get my dream job there at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. So this is both an avocation and a vocation for me. Very passionate about the history of this area of Wyoming. And for me, this was probably one of the most exciting projects I ever worked on. Keep in mind, growing up in the Powell-Cody area, I always assumed Buffalo Bill was just the town founder of Cody. It wasn't until later that I found out he had this Wild West show that other people knew about. And he was an international celebrity. Okay, that kind of came to me later. To me, he was always the person who founded the town of Cody, where my dad's side of the family resided. And so again, I connected him to my heritage in that way. This research opened up my eyes to a certain extent and offered me a very different perspective about the role of Buffalo Bill in the founding of Cody, Wyoming. So, a little bit about how I got here. So, I started at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West managing a project called the Papers of William F. Cody. And our goal was to collect as much of the writings we could by Buffalo Bill, the correspondence, his publications, and make them accessible to the public. And that's quite a challenge, because this may shock you, but our number one resource for finding letters written by Buffalo Bill is not archives, not museums, but eBay. And so a lot of this information is basically being sold off. A lot of the information is also buried in people's basements. One of the first projects I worked on with the papers was I went out to Buffalo, New York to meet an individual. He said, "I have all these papers from my grandfather." His name was Rumsey, Bronson Rumsey, and he was involved with Buffalo Bill and Cody. "Would you be interested in seeing this?" And I went out to Buffalo, New York, and went to his office. He brought out this plastic grocery bag and just dumped out canceled checks, contracts, correspondence, ledgers, all of it related to the founding of the town of Cody, and it was in the basement in Buffalo, New York. He shocked me a little because he said, I wasn't thinking at the time, I was just enamored with this treasure find. He said, "Here, let me get you a cup of coffee." And he came out with this huge cup of coffee and set it right next to all this archival information. A little nerve-wracking, but I did manage to get a couple sips of coffee and move it to another table there. But also part of the papers is we try to reprint manuscripts that were written by Buffalo Bill, of course, and his colleagues. And some of these have never been published before, and that includes the manuscript here, the manuscript written by George Beck. Now, we knew there were two versions of the manuscript when we started this project. There was one at the Park County Archives in Cody, Wyoming. It was typewritten, and it contained 99 pages. Okay, it covered mainly the founding of the town of Cody. The American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming had another manuscript, and it was 118 pages, and it kind of covered all of Beck's life, including some of the early experiences. We thought, okay, this is interesting. We compared the two. My co-editor, Lynn House, and I did, and we looking at these, and we said, these are very different from one another. Okay, there's a different scope of material in here, different lengths. Some of the paragraphs that are similar are yet a little bit different in each manuscript. So what's going on here? It just so happened that Lynn House knew George Beck's granddaughter, B.J. Gerber, Betty Jane Gerber, and she lives in Virginia, and we called her up and said, hey, BJ, do you happen to have any writings from your grandfather? And she said, oh yes. George and I are coming out to Cody, Wyoming, and we have a bunch of boxes we want to clear out. We'll bring them with us. So they brought out 4 boxes of photographs, letters. We get to the last box, and there is stack after stack after stack of manuscripts. We got to looking at these, and some of these were written as historical novels. We thought, this is getting strange, and finally keep digging down to the bottom, and I'm not making this up, but we get down towards the bottom of the last box, and we find this folder right here, this 3-ring binder. And I know it's hard to see from the image there, but it basically says, Son to the West, the story of George T. Beck, Lexington, Kentucky, to Cody, Wyoming. And then there's some edits down there, and someone has wrote, Priceless Heritage and Beckoning Frontiers. We thought, well, this is interesting. We open it up, and it turns out this was probably the original manuscript Beck was working with. So it's obvious that he narrated this to someone, probably his wife, who transcribed it. We're going to talk about what happened to this manuscript and others later, but just to give you an overview of George Beck. And growing up in Cody, Wyoming, I always assumed George Beck was the stern businessman, the entrepreneur who basically completed all the logistics for Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill kind of ordered him around, and he built everything and got it going, and lo and behold, the town of Cody was founded. Okay, that's what I assumed. But getting into this, we get a little different interpretation about Beck's role in not just Cody, Wyoming, but the state of Wyoming, including the Sheridan area as well. But anyway, George Washington Thornton Beck was born to James Birney Beck and Jane Augusta Washington Thornton. James Birney Beck was from Scotland. He immigrated here with his uncles. Jane Augusta Washington, that's right, she is connected to the Washington family. She's a grandniece to President Washington. Her family was really upset. Okay, we deal with this today, but imagine this. They were really concerned that someone in the Washington family would dare to marry a foreigner, an immigrant, especially from Scotland. And I think you still have that today with the name Johnston. My in-laws weren't too happy about me. I assumed it was my Scottish heritage, but maybe not. So, George Beck grew up in Kentucky. So his father was a member of the House of Representatives and later became a senator at a very critical time period in American history, right at the beginning and the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, Kentucky was a border state, so you can imagine his father was basically caught in between the North and the South. And he had friends on both sides. And I think Beck learned from his father and how to collaborate and how to get things done. His mother went through quite a bit, and I know he put a lot of stress on her. There's a great story he tells in the memoir where he decided one day to get into all her patent medicines and try them all out, sample everything, and he had a pet monkey that helped him sample some things as well, and she came home and found all her patent medicines scattered all over by her son. But he realized that he had this deep connection to American heritage, American's history, through his Washington family connections, and wanted to do something to contribute to the growth and development of the United States. And by the way, the house that he grew up in is still standing in Lexington, Kentucky. This is it. It's now a law office, but it is still standing. So George Washington Thornton Beck was born in 1856. As I noted, he was kind of a wild child. He was the only son there. I think he was somewhat spoiled and pampered. He was very well connected through his father and made a lot of friends with some of his father's political colleagues. He went to Van Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, where he learned how to be a surveyor. Okay, and it was these surveying skills that would play a critical role in the opening of Becton, Wyoming, and Cody, Wyoming. Now, being a little bit adventurous, he decided he was going to come out west. And his first trek was to Leadville, at the height of the mining rush there. So as you imagine, he showed up in this kind of lawless frontier. He again had all sorts of adventures. He noted that he had met a bunch of questionable characters there. However, his mom's experience helped him out. He knew through all those patent medicines that he kind of experimented with what would work well in curing certain ailments. And so he became somewhat of a medic there in the mining camps at Leadville. But then his parents read in the newspapers of the Meeker Massacre, the Ute Uprising in Colorado, and they panicked. And they demanded that he come back home. And he got back home and proved he was okay, and they said, okay, well, we'll let you go back out west again. This time he joined the survey crews for the Northern Pacific Railroad. He was there when they were laying the road bed across Montana, the Dakota Territory into Montana. He spent a miserable winter over in the Little Missouri area, around Medora, North Dakota. But it's there that he decides to kind of set out and try and find his own place. And he starts crossing Montana. He stops at Miles City, where he runs into General Nelson A. Miles, and Miles tells him about this wonderful place that has just been opened up in the aftermath of the Indian Wars that had concluded in the aftermath of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the Powder River country. He decides to come down here, and that's when he locates at Beckoning, Wyoming. He builds himself a little cabin, sets up a flour mill. He claimed that his flour won first prize at the Columbian Exposition in 1893. He was one of the first to bring sheep up into the Powder River country, which made him really popular with a lot of the local ranchers. So Morton Fruin basically told him, okay, you're one of us, you've survived here for a while, we'll let you bring some sheep in, but that's it, no more. So he did bring in sheep. He loved to hunt. He had some hunting dogs, as you can see here. And, he basically enjoyed this lifestyle, being a rancher, a sheep herder, a farmer out in Wyoming. I think he had grander ideas, though. He wanted to be a politician like his father, so he ran for the territorial legislature. He was there when Wyoming Territory shifted over to becoming a state. Very well connected politically. He had a lot of friends here in Sheridan. In fact, I know it's kind of hard to see some of these images here, but you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, that is George Beck on the right, and the person on the left is, there's going to be a test, by the way. I forgot to tell you that. You're not going to win anything, so, but that is Oliver H. Wallop. So the future Earl of Portsmouth, actually when he was getting married, did not have a suit. And so he wore George Beck's suit that his father had bought him in Washington, D.C. So Wallop was married in George Beck's suit. He was very good friends with Frank Canton, who was part of the Johnston County invasion. In fact, Frank Canton's wife worked for Beck. Beck said he met Jesse and Frank James when they came through this area. And I'm not going to get into the questionability of that story and get tarred and feathered in Sheridan and run out of here. But he said he met Frank and Jesse James. Horace Alger became one of his good friends who played a very important role in the founding of the town of Cody, Wyoming as well. And this makes it a great story because he met all these people. I've had people come up to me and say he's like Forrest Gump. And he goes around and he meets all these famous people and has all these great experiences. And it is amazing, but whoever was dictating or was writing Beck's dictation on the memoir did not know how to spell. And Beck was a tremendous name dropper, and so Lynn House and I just went absolutely nuts trying to research some of these people. Some we never did uncover who they actually were because they were, their last names were misspelled, first names were mixed up. Sometimes he'd take two separate people and switch their names around. It took a while to sort some of that out. But anyway, he was very well connected in the state here. And he was also friends with Horton Bull. Horton Bull, who met his untimely end here in the Sheridan Inn. I think, and some of you locals may be able to answer this because I am staying here this evening, is it his ghost that haunts the place? It's Miss Kate, okay. But I've heard Horton Bull's also involved. Is it just Miss Kate?
Horton Bull is involved also. There have been people that have seen him.
Okay, all right. I've heard there's a number of ghost stories here, so, and I'm not sure exactly where I'm staying. And you got to imagine being a historian, I'm putting myself in a hell of a position here because I'm talking about this guy, and if I misrepresent him, God only knows what's going to happen to me tonight. So anyway, Horton Bull was here, and Beck knew Horton Bull, and of course Beck knew he was Buffalo Bill Cody's son-in-law. Okay, now George Beck, he also loved to prospect, and he was also up at Bald Mountain City there, and he was prospecting, and a guy by the name of Jerry Ryan came up to him and said, a friend of mine named Logan Hillberry was on top of the Bighorns. He looked across the basin, he saw this canyon, and he went and decided to check it out. He walked down the mountain across the Bighorn Basin to the mouth of the canyon there, looked around and said that would be a good place for a reclamation project. You have to keep in mind this is right after the Carey Act had been passed, where people could claim certain sections of land. The state would be given the land to homestead, and then the water companies would sell the water rights. So a lot of people were trying to make money off of this, and Beck said, this may work. And so he investigated it. But he realized if you're going to start a new town and a reclamation project, and you're going to do it on a place that the trappers identified as Coulter's Hell, located alongside the Stinking Water River, you need a salesman. You need someone that can really promote this if you're going to get investors, if you're going to get homesteaders. You need someone who can sell this. And he realized that person was Buffalo Bill Cody. And I like to point out to everybody here in Wyoming that Buffalo Bill was even more famous than Kanye West. Okay? Kanye has nothing on Buffalo Bill. And just to show this, how prominent Buffalo Bill was, back in the 70s, before the internet, Don Russell did some research on Wild West shows, and he uncovered at least 116 different Wild West shows before, during, and after Buffalo Bill's Wild West. Name one besides Buffalo Bill. Anybody? Sometimes Pawnee Bill gets in there, thanks to Ethel Merman and Annie Get Your Gun. But we remember Buffalo Bill. And the reason for that is he had this unique combination of being an authentic plainsman, an authentic frontier hero, and a very good showman. Okay? An outstanding showman that had an incredible knack to dramatizing the American West, which still impacts us today. If you turn on any Western film and see Indians attacking stagecoaches, which rarely happened out here, Pony Express, which only lasted for a year and a half, okay, all of that you need to thank Buffalo Bill's Wild West. Now Beck realized this is the guy who can sell this project. And so they used Horton Bull to get Buffalo Bill in. Buffalo Bill at this time was investing in about everything you can imagine. He invested in the Sheridan Inn here. He had a transportation company. His idea was to run stagecoaches from Sheridan to Yellowstone National Park. They were going to dress them up like vaqueros and even have Indian attacks along the way to make it exciting. Okay? At least that's according to the Red Lodge newspapers. So with Cody on board, these two men began putting together the Cody Canal, and they made it work. They got the investors from Buffalo, New York. Okay, they brought them in, they got the money, and they were able to get settlers in, including suckers like my family, who decided to go homestead on the Stinking Water River that became the Shoshone River after the state changed its name under the direction of Buffalo Bill and George Beck. A little more appetizing name. So, and actually, this was quite a change for Beck himself personally. He met a school teacher out there in the town of Marquette, Daisy Sorensen, and the two of them fell in love. And I'm going to come back to their courtship here in a little bit because this was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. But anyway, the two fell in love, they were married, and they had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. So and you can see the couple there. And this is the head gate for the Cody Canal, diverting water from the South Fork of the stinking water of the Shoshone River. And here you can see Beck's first home in Cody, Wyoming. How many are ready to go live there? Isn't that a great yard? Okay, this is the new Garden of Eden that you're going to homestead and settle in, Cody, Wyoming. You can see why they needed a good salesman. But anyway, between the two of them, they weren't quite as successful as they thought they were going to be. At one time, Cody was advertising itself as the new Denver of the West. Didn't quite make it to that status, but we did okay. Because if you look around this state, even here in this area, we have a number of ghost towns scattered everywhere. We have towns that simply did not make it for whatever reason. You know, it was like playing high-stakes poker. You were dealt a hand and you had to play the cards the best you could. Sometimes transportation would work in your benefit. Sometimes, boom, oil boom, coal boom, or whatever would make the town work. You never knew exactly what that winning combination was going to be, but you needed to basically be able to bluff your way through a lot of this, and this is where Cody and Beck did a really good job. So, and by the way, this actually is the same house. So this was one of the first brick structured stone structures in Cody, Wyoming, and this is after they remodeled it. So, and actually they incorporated the little house in there. That remained kind of their kitchen area. And then they built this big stone structure here. Unfortunately, this house was torn down. So this is was located where the Cody Manor is now located. So anyway, the Becks eventually left everything in Sheridan. Beck sold off his ranch around Beckton. I'm not exactly sure why he cut off all ties here. We can kind of speculate. I think he was a little spooked by the events of the Johnston County War. He indicates one time he had a little bit of a run-in where he thought he was going to get bushwhacked. I think he also thought that Cody was going to make him a lot of money, and he invested in coal, oil, he set up a water plant there, he brought electricity to the town, and he lived a very comfortable life. And they were basically the high society of Cody. And again, kind of the two pictures of George Beck. This is shortly before he passed away in 1943. I think most people in Cody remember this cigar smoking guy. I know the Simpson boys did. So they were gracious enough. Al and Pete Simpson wrote the foreword to the Beckoning Frontiers memoir. Apparently they were a little bit of a handful when they were little. You haven't heard that in Sheridan at all, have you? No. So anyway, a little bit of a handful, and their parents were very good friends with the Becks, and they spent a lot of time over there, and they always, as Al said, he always kind of reminded him of the Monopoly man, and they had to be on their best behavior over there. But I love this photograph because this really shows another side of Beck that I don't think we really knew about until we found this memoir. In fact, I found it to be very strange the first time I met B.J. Gerber and her husband George. She said, you know, the one thing I remember about my grandfather was his wonderful puckish sense of humor. That sketch by Olive Fell, a Cody artist, does that look like a guy with a puckish sense of humor? Sucking on the old stogie there? No. But this guy here does. This guy looks like a guy that you'd like to sit and listen to him tell stories and jokes. So it kind of surprised me, and I kind of thought, okay, that's interesting, that's something she recalls about her grandfather. And by the way, she met him only a few times. Her father was the ambassador in China in the late 1930s. Think about what's going on in the late 1930s. So Japan's invading China. Her and her mother and her brother fled to Cody basically and stayed with her grandparents. And she said she loved sitting in the back of her grandfather's car, and he always had a bag of ginger snaps there, and she'd eat ginger snaps and she'd listen to his stories. and his wonderful jokes. She just had a great time. Now, my experience, connections with Beck, you know, I knew very little about him before I started this project, and a lot of that ties to the historiography of Beck. In many cases, he was completely overshadowed by the guy he brought in to promote the project, Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill Cody gets credit for everything, and that's what I believed as a young boy. This book here, Last of the Great Scouts, this was written by Buffalo Bill Cody's sister, and she tells what really happened in the discovery of the Bighorn Basin in Cody, Wyoming. According to her brother, he was going on a trip to the Bighorn Mountains and he had an eye infection. And the doctor told him, you need to bathe your eyes with whiskey to clean out that infection. Buffalo Bill said, there's no way I'm going to waste good whiskey on my eyes. So he tells his companion, he said, just bandage my eyes up, you know, and lead me over that direction, you know, tell me when we get to the top of the Bighorns, we'll check my eyes then, and we'll be fine. Let's just keep going. So he and his companion get up to the top of the Bighorn Mountains, and they're looking off towards the west there, and Cody still has his bandages on, can't see anything, and his friend says, let me go get something that'll help you. So his friend disappears for a couple days and comes back with this bottled magical water, mineral water, and he bathes Cody's eyes, and Cody opens up his eyes and he sees the Bighorn Basin. And he recalled that he had met a Arapaho Indian one time that said this was Ethity, their homeland, their spiritual land, you know. And Cody just said, the Bighorn Basin, the first time I saw it, it was green as could be. And there were trees all along the rivers there. Deer, antelope, buffalo were all frolicking, playing with each other. It was the promised land. And that's how he sold Cody, Wyoming and the Cody Canal. People saw him as a Moses-like figure, okay? Didn't quite happen that way. The other version of Beck came out by Lady Doc, Carolyn Lockhart. Carolyn Lockhart was a famous novelist who lived in Cody, Wyoming, and she wrote a number of books that have been kind of forgotten by today's society, but at the time, she modeled a lot of her characters after local Cody residents. And these were pretty sensational books. This is the story of Lady Doc, who was based on Doc Lane, a female doctor in Cody, Wyoming. And there's not so subtle references. This book was published in the early 1900s, but not so subtle references to her being a lesbian. Okay? And she basically, Carolyn Lockhart, puts Doc Lane in a relationship with Daisy Beck. In fact, Daisy leaves the George Beck character and goes with Doc Lane. Okay? Now, the way Beck is portrayed in this is he's basically this corrupt land dealer who's coming in and taking advantage of everybody, who has these highfalutin connections, I'll get it out there, connections to the east, okay? And he's seen as basically being the high society guy in this rough town, this rough western town. To this day, you do not mention Carolyn Lockhart's name in front of B.J. Gerber, okay? The family hates Carolyn Lockhart. They hate this book with a passion because it really did do a number on Beck's character, portraying him as this corrupt, incompetent man who basically lost his wife to Doc Lane, okay? Now, the Buffalo Bill version, though, kind of overshadows that Carolyn Lockhart depiction. So any of the local histories you pick up that were written about Cody in the 1900s here basically focus on Buffalo Bill as the town founder. He's usually given credit as being the one that moved this forward, and Beck was the guy that kind of handled all the logistics there, but Cody was really the one moving everything forward. That changed when this book came out in the early 2000s, William F. Cody's Wyoming Empire, The Buffalo Bill Nobody Knows by Robert Bonner. Bonner, who grew up in Powell, in case you wonder, there's kind of a Powell versus Cody rivalry. Probably sent, what is it, Buffalo Sheridan here? Okay. So anyway, Bonner really kind of took Cody to task here in this biography and basically said Cody was incompetent, had no idea what he was doing. It was Beck, the one who was the serious guy that got this moving forward. And by the time all was said and done, these two men were no longer friends with one another. Okay? Kind of a dismal depiction, but again, it had some valid points. It really demonstrated that Beck was really kind of the mover and shaker in Cody. But you got to keep in mind, when Bonner wrote this, he was using the two manuscripts that were at the Heritage Center and the Park County Archives. Okay, as a historian, this was what fascinated me the most about working with Beck's memoir, because we assume primary resources, things that in archives are pretty reliable, right? Okay? If someone wrote it in a letter, someone wrote it in a memoir, or whatever, that's pretty reliable. Okay? So we assumed that what was in the archives was good, and then we get this, and all of a sudden I start to see how the two daughters began reworking the manuscript. They were desperate to get this published. As soon as he died, they were working with all sorts of major publishers. The problem, I talk about this in the introduction, the problem at the time is people back in the 40s, 50s, they saw town builders as the Wyatt Earp types. And unfortunately, or fortunately, Beck never shot anyone on the streets of Cody. Okay? He never had a big shootout at the OK Corral, so publishers just kind of dismissed this. They weren't interested in a guy who put all this collaboration together to build a town and a reclamation project. This is what shocked me at first. So this is from the page where he describes the courting of Daisy and Marquette. And so I'm going to read this, the unedited version and then the edited version. 2 or 3 years before I made the call on Mrs. Hurst, we'll talk about that here in a minute, I met Miss Daisy Sorensen. She was living with her sister and brother-in-law at the ranch near our head gate on the South Fork. She was very pretty and very young, and I maintain I won her with a barrel of ginger snaps. Anyway, I used to take her driving in my buckboard, and she certainly ate an awful lot of ginger snaps. Okay, and then it goes on, he basically says, I finally worked up the courage to marry her, or ask her to marry me, and she said yes, but I wasn't sure if she was saying yes to more ginger snaps or to my proposal. Okay, again, this guy had a sense of humor, a wry sense of humor. This is how it reads after it was edited. I met Miss Daisy Sorensen. She was very pretty and very young. Anyway, I used to take her driving in my buggy. Not buckboard, buggy. I asked her to marry me. She said yes. That's a little different image, isn't it? Okay? That makes this guy very, very stale, without any sense of humor, and all of that was stripped out of the manuscript. And again, you go through page after page, you can see the daughter's handwriting, the notes, the edits here, throughout the manuscript. We can tell there was probably about 3 or 4 different editors that went through here, cleaned it up, and then they sent the cleaned versions of the manuscript to the archives, where they were used by historians like me to interpret Beck's contributions to Cody, Wyoming. So in this part here, going back to Bonner's assertion that Beck and Cody kind of had a falling out, didn't really get along, when these two guys got together, it was like 2 frat brothers on a road trip. Okay, I'm surprised the Bighorn Basin tolerated them for as long as they did. This whole section here describes a trip where they went down to visit the ranchers around Meeteetse, and they just so happened to end up in the Mormon community of Burlington. George Beck, Buffalo Bill, in a Mormon community. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. So anyway, Beck loved to play jokes on Cody. So he told Cody, there's a rancher there, and he has 2 daughters. One is kind of plain, and one's very, very attractive. She is the belle of the whole town. So when you meet this rancher, be sure to ask to dance with, he gave the name, okay? Cody says, oh, okay, thanks. So he goes out and meets the rancher, and he says, I'd love to meet your daughter, so-and-so. Well, it just so happens that was the plain one. And she found out out this international celebrity was asking about her, she fell in love and she would not let Cody alone for the rest of the night. She basically chased him all around the dance, and he just kind of go by and shake his fists at Beck. Beck and Cody also noted that they would sneak off into the dark and get some whiskey out of the wagon and have a little shot every now and then. And he notes that we would get the Mormons to come out with us, but they would always come out one at a time. They never came out in a group. So they'd have a sip of whiskey, and then they'd go back into the dance. The next morning, Beck and Cody get out to the wagon. They find out their bottle of whiskey has been stolen. And I wish I knew this at the time we were putting together the memoir, but I ran into one of the descendants of the family that hosted that dance. And lo and behold, I found an account where it wasn't the Mormon elders who stole the whiskey. It was a group of Mormon kids. Mormon boys went out there and stole the bottle. And they kind of kept it hidden from everybody. Well, Beck and Cody were upset. They left the town. They were angered. And so they ran into a freighter. He said, I'm hauling goods to Burlington. They said, do you have any whiskey? He says, I got one case. They said, they owe us a case of whiskey. We're taking it. And serves them right. They said it was the worst tasting whiskey they ever sampled. So this whole story is detailed here in this section. I'm going to try to get through the wires here because I know it's hard for you guys to see, but see the lines right here? The brackets on each side of the paragraph. Written next to that is omit, omit, omit. That was completely stripped out. So if you want to read the whole sordid story there, it's now in that memoir that we've just published. So, but anyway, Beck and Cody did get along, and Beck was very prominent in promoting the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, memorials to Cody as well, because I think he always realized that they both played a critical role in making the town of Cody work and bringing irrigation to that area. They never would have done it without Beck's surveying skills, his logistical skills, and they never would have been able to do it without Buffalo Bill's promotional skills. So I think the two of them made pretty good partners, but and anyway, this is another image of the head gate here. And of course, that kind of started off reclamation in the Shoshone River Valley here. Buffalo Bill then worked with the Reclamation Service, and pretty soon most of the Shoshone River was irrigated. But one thing I do think that was great about this book was it's not just Beck and Cody that played a role here. And I think Beck's connections with his father and his father's ability to collaborate, work with different factions, played a very good role in here, because this is basically the people who really can be considered the town founders. So we have the Wyoming Senators, Kerry and Warren, who passed the Reclamation Act. We have Logan Hillberry and Jerry Ryan, who were the ones who actually proposed the project. Elwood Mead was the state engineer. He basically told these guys, start small. You're not going to be able to reclaim, irrigate the whole Shoshone River Valley at once. You need to start small with this one project. Charles Hayden was the surveyor. There's a great story in there where Charles Hayden and Beck were laying out the town plot for Cody, and according to Beck, a big gust of wind came up and sucked up the town plat. I don't know if you heard, we do have some wind problems in Cody. But anyway, sucked up the town plat, and Beck said that it now was registered in the bosom of Abraham. Of course, they had to start with another town plat. Hayden was the one who designed the project and overcame some incredible obstacles. And then investors from Buffalo, New York, Bronson Rumsey, George Blystein, H.M. Gerrans, and Horace Alger. Did I not get him on the list? Oh, I did. First part, okay. Oh, God. Whew. I'm starting to smell the tar here and see the feathers come in. I do have Horace Alger here, the Sheridan banker who was critical in all of this as well. And then also his show partner, Nate Salisbury. How many of you have been to Cody and noticed the street names? Sound familiar? All of them, yes, Salisbury, all of them have streets named after him. This was what I found fascinating. Beck tells about this in his memoir. The real person who saved Cody, Wyoming was Phoebe Hurst, the mother of William Randolph Hearst. Yeah, Citizen Hearst. His mother saved the town of Cody. So all these investors got together, and even with Cody's publicity skills, they couldn't pull it off. They ran out of money. And it was estimated, Beck estimated, it cost him $22 per acre to irrigate this area. That's back in the early 1900s. Okay. He goes to Phoebe Hurst and says, I need help. Would you buy the water bonds and bail us out? Because no one else wants to invest in these water bonds. And she said, yeah, I'll buy the water bonds, George. Yeah, my husband and your dad worked together in the Senate. Sure, I trust you. I know you'll pay me back. She bought the bonds. She sent back to her financial advisor, and he said, are you crazy? There's no way I'm giving you this money. He said, call Mrs. Hurst. And he calls Mrs. Hurst, and she says, give him the money. So he takes the money, he runs into Cody, who actually was almost bankrupt with the Wild West show, and he said, Guy, can I borrow some of this to keep the show going? And Beck gave him some of that money, and then took the rest back to Cody, finished up the project, and they paid Mrs. Hurst. Okay? How many of you have driven down Hurst Avenue in Cody, Wyoming? You have?
I think so.
It doesn't exist. Were you at the Silver Dollar first? Okay, all right. So, yeah, there is nothing in Cody, Wyoming to honor Phoebe Hurst. Nothing whatsoever. And so I'm kind of on a crusade now to get her recognized in the town, some form or fashion. So, but anyway, as you can see, this was quite a collaborative effort, and it was quite an informational project for me, just to kind of see how our perceptions of the past are shaped. And I know Cody, Wyoming is not the only community that is shaped by different people, different resources, different historians. But again, you always have to keep in mind, history is never 2020. Okay? History is always interpretive, and it changes, and it can change dramatically when you uncover something like this. So, thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, Carrie? Yeah, and by the way, I want to extend a thanks to Carrie and her team for setting all this up. So it's been great working with them, and thanks all of you for showing up this evening. I'd be happy to answer any easy questions. Yes, sir.
One of the water right filings out by Beck and by George Beck is a milling water right. Now you mentioned a flour mill. Did he have a lumber mill out there also, do you know?
Look, the question is he had a water right for milling, and wondering if there was a lumber yard out there as well, a lumber mill, and I don't think there was, but I know he had to be doing something to get timber in there. Because if you look at the photo of the mill, those aren't logs. So, but I do know that the flour mill was water operated. And the grinding stones are still out around Becton there. You can see them today. So, yeah, he was pretty ingenious. And he, being a surveyor, he was always fascinated with water. And in Cody, he set up the electric plant there. And, so he was always interested in using water to generate power in some form or fashion. So it wouldn't surprise me if he had some kind of lumber mill out there. Other questions? Yes.
I just had a comment. I've been to Cody several times and asked why that lake outside of Cody is called Beck Lake. And the people that I was with, nobody knew why it was called Beck Lake, but obviously this must be one.
Yeah, and that's the old quarry. So the stones that were used to build the Beck home that I showed you came from that lake, came from that area, and then it was filled up. And believe it or not, George and B.J. Gerber still own that land. It's covered with water, but they still own the land underneath Beck Lake there. And so I know George, every time he says he gets a little tired with something going on in Cody, he's going to threaten to build some kind of structure out there. But it'd have to be on poles to get it up above the water there. But you're absolutely right. That's named for him. It was the old quarry. Yes?
This was a successful meeting, good cookies.
I can't take credit for the cookies, but I'm glad, yeah, they look very good, so. Do you need to shout out the sponsor's name?
They're right next door, Andy's Coffee and Cookies, and the coffee cake was $5.99, yes.
So Andy's Cookies and Coffee. Did you have a question?
Well, it wasn't really a question. This is more about Buffalo Bill Cody. My great uncle, who was born in the late I don't know what year, because his sister was born in 1899, and he's an older brother. His first wife, Carolyn, was a great aunt or something to Buffalo Bill. And I think as a young man, he was considered the black sheep of the family because he was probably pretty wild.
The Buffalo Bill or the?
Yeah, Buffalo Bill was related to my great uncle's first wife.
Okay, yeah. No, it's amazing being at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. We still have a lot of family members involved, including direct descendants of Buffalo Bill Cody. And it was quite an extensive family. And I know Buffalo Bill is also, kind of seen as this independent, rugged pioneer. Not a lot of family connections. His marriage was horrible because, as all of you know, it was here in Sheridan, Wyoming that Buffalo Bill attempted to divorce Louisa, and the judge threw it out of court because there wasn't enough evidence. But he was actually, as a young boy, he was pretty good in taking care of his mother and his sisters. And in fact, all of his sisters ended up moving into the Cody area because Buffalo Bill assumed this was going to be his retirement home. And he started bringing them all out and doing everything he could to give their husbands positions, jobs, as well as the kids as well. And if you ever come across a book, Letters from Buffalo Bill by Stella Foote, edited by Stella Foote, it's the letters to Buffalo Bill's older sister, and she really became his confidant. And really kind of interesting just to see that relationship. Yes, sir.
Just an observation you might be interested in. You mentioned Logan Hillberry.
Yes.
As he was the engineer for the water canals and whatever, I believe, over there. His grandson worked out at Beckoning for a great number of years.
Yeah, and Logan Hillberry was one that we rediscovered through this project, and we found out he's buried in Thermopolis. And we had no idea, but there was family connections there, and because of the work we were doing, Lynn House, who now is the director of the Cody Heritage Museum, she was able to get Logan Hillberry's binoculars and his telescopic scope, which is probably what he used when he was on top of the Bighorns looking out towards the canyon there, and that's now on display at the Cody Museum, the Cody Heritage Museum. So, but he was quite a character.
Yeah, and two of his, what would be his great-granddaughters still live in Sheridan.
In Sheridan, okay. Yeah, no, we had no idea. When we started this, we kind of assumed he probably faded away, and thankfully we were able to make some connections. I can't remember which ancestor it was, but yeah, or which descendant it was, but yeah, he was quite a guy. He did a lot, and I think again he was one of these family members, or from one of these families that thought Buffalo Bill got all the credit and he didn't get as much as he deserved. All right. Don't see any more questions. I'll be sticking around here. I'll be happy to sign any copies of books you may have purchased or answer any follow-up questions. So thank you very much.